Hello and welcome to Design Education Talks by the New Art School. Our guest today is Ari Chand. Welcome, Ari.
Thanks, Lefteris. It's good to see you again.
It's great to see you here. It's fantastic. So tell us about you and your work.
Thanks for having me on, Lefteris. I appreciate it. I'm a lecturer in illustration animation at the University of South Australia, soon to be Adelaide University, which is something I'll probably talk about a little bit. But I guess a lot of the work that I do is in the illustration space and the illustration research space. I have a number of PhD candidates and honours candidates and teach in illustration animation studio here at South Australia, which is Australia's only degree that combines illustration and animation together, which is quite unique about it and, quite exciting as well. Still quite studio-focused teaching, which I know you're a big fan of, and a lot of drawing still involved in our program and our teaching, which is quite exciting. I've got a number of projects that I'm doing at the moment as well. So I'm working on a short film with another colleague, Dr. James Calvert, which is like integrating AI and kind of making fun of it at the same time. Hopefully working on book chapters and journal articles and all the academic things that we are all doing at the same time as incorporating it into our teaching. I suppose it's such a balance and a juggle, as you know. Almost anywhere else in the world, which at the moment, yeah. So
tell us about your path. How did you get into teaching?
It's a good question. It's one I've sort of been thinking about most of the day, to be honest, as we're getting ready for teaching as well in Australia, which works on a slightly different sort of teaching cycle to a lot of the Northern Hemisphere. I've always sort of been involved in teaching somehow, and I really think there's a strong connection between learning and teaching. And how I've learned is often been something that I've wanted to sort of share. I actually did an undergraduate degree in teaching as well as a part of my journey, so was sort of trained in teaching practices, which is actually coming quite useful as I sort of started working in the higher education sector. But I've always been involved in art and design, and I think there's such a culture of design. And I guess I've watched a lot of great design teachers, and that really inspired me to sort of enter into teaching. And when I first started my PhD was the main opportunity to start teaching into a class at the time, a theory class. So I was taught into both theory sort of classes and studio classes, I guess, for like the last 10 years now at two different universities. So it's really interesting to see the different combination of how those sorts of things work, in terms of design education, how theory comes into practice. I'm a self-confessed nerd, and so I kind of like, poring over the history of design just as much as the practices of design. And I think I've always liked that combination that I've sort of had and try to bring that into my teaching. And I think, ultimately I sort of, as I started doing doctoral study is when I got opportunities to start teaching and showcasing some of the skills that I'd learned from doing different, freelance work and all sorts of things. So I think, I think what's always great about teaching is that it's a two-way street. You're learning from students, and I still do as well now in the studios and theory, all the types of conversations that we're having now around AI, et cetera, and the future of design is just as exciting to me as now as it was probably about 10 years ago, talking about some of the different changes that were happening in Photoshop and InDesign and UX and service design entering the design education sphere at the time. Things have actually changed a lot in 10 years. So I think in terms of my entry to teaching, it was really at the start of my sort of doctoral PhD study where I was very fortunate to have a supervisor kind of say, hey, do you want to be involved in one of the courses that I'm teaching? So that was kind of my entry point, I suppose, into it. But I've taught lots of different things since, as you probably have yourself.
Absolutely. So what do you feel has changed in the past 10 years, let's say?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about it too, because of a lot of the conversations that have been happening recently around not just in design education, but sort of philosophically, more broadly in societies, lots of different sort of, as they say, you know, wicked problems that are starting to arise within the broader global geographic, locations of different parts of even Australia. Things that are pressure points now were things that we would often discuss in sort of design scenarios and ethical scenarios quite a while ago. Like, you know, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to be having a conversation with design students about, you know, AI and love and, you know, the future of swiping and how that could be a design problem. And that was, you know, nearly 10 years ago, which was when Tinder first came into the zeitgeist, I suppose. And we look now 10 years on and there's completely different sort of social problems that are evolving in society. But those were sort of design things that we were thinking about. So, you know, as you know, design is kind of integrated in most of the way that we experience the world. You know, it's constantly transforming our experience. But I think the way that it's changed in terms of the way that we talk about it now, I think is almost less speculative and sort of more problem orientated, which is surprising to me because there's been a long history of trying to not focus on specific problems and think more structurally about things when we're teaching students. But I think now we've got all these, it's almost quite overwhelming for students to talk about all the problems that are there to fixate on in terms of a classroom. And I think that's something that I've really noticed happening, is that what once could be maybe a design problem we isolate in a scenario and talk about with students is maybe just way too interconnected into all the other problems of the world. So I guess that's something that I've really noticed, is the sort of shift in how many problems there are and how, you know, especially eco-anxiety in the future, sustainability, you know, the way that societal pressures, the costs of living, you know, all of these sorts of things are things that play into things like political illustration, for example, things we teach in the classroom, editorial and political illustration, that social commentary that goes on about all the different experiences that people are having around the world, or war, etc., is still, as a visual practice, which we teach, is something that they're reflecting on, you know, they're maybe quite overwhelmed by at times. So, yeah, those sorts of things are things that I've noticed in the classroom, I suppose, is, you know, there's a lot going on in the world at the moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What do you feel the challenges are for students right now? Because they seem to be having quite a few.
Yeah. I think, well, as I sort of have just mentioned, like the economic pressures are a big one. And I think what's really fascinating is another thing that has changed probably even in the 10 years that I've been teaching is the focus on like equity and inclusion, right? So the idea that education is a transformative power for, you know, how students can be enlightened, like especially design education, like it can change people's lives. It's, you know, design education is a really powerful tool for people being able to enter all sorts of careers, yes, but as a way of thinking about the world and experiencing it. And I think, you know, ultimately those sorts of pressures are the things that maybe universities are starting to try and address. But, you know, there's a lot more alternate pathways into university these days, especially in Australia, like open access pathways, things that you don't necessarily have to have done in the end of school career to be able to enter into university, which is amazing. But I think there's still a lot of cost of living pressures. Like our students are often working one or two other jobs in order to sustain their time and split their brain in studies. And I don't think that's uncommon elsewhere as well. I think, you know, people are really trying to manage lots of different hats as they're learning and engaging with tertiary or higher education study. So
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we're facing, because students are doing two things badly. They're neither working nor studying in a way in that mode, because there's a pathway to work, so you can advance through working somewhere, start from and or through study. But if you're not neither working nor studying, then you're not focusing the attention very much. That's a huge challenge, I find.
Yeah, and I mean the other thing too there, it's probably worth mentioning that is that obviously university is not the only way to study as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so many different options nowadays to learn lots of different skills, and I think there's a real disruption in the sort of learning and teaching experience. You know, there's a lot more options to learn skills. You know, it's not just university that's going to maybe teach you those skills, and it's not just the idea of a person standing in front of a room anymore. It's much more organic, and it's much more a dialogue with students in the studio environment, and it's always about what they bring to the table just as much as what you can offer them in that process. But I agree, there's a lot more splitting the brain in terms of do they have the bandwidth and to actually look at the issue properly, and even just the time in studios that you might get, or the time that they can actually put in between each week to get, you know, that iterative feedback that works really well in a studio environment. Like if they keep coming the next week and they haven't done the thing that they're supposed to have done because they are sort of loaded up with all of these, life things. It's a really, it's quite a pressure cooker in some cases.
Yeah.
I've seen sort of, students really sort of are struggling with that, I guess, a bit more recently,
Absolutely. So what do you think we can do as educators or universities to help them more? Like, how can we do design education differently so we can give more to the students?
Yeah, it's actually something that's, I guess, like I've sort of mentioned earlier, part of a big university merger at the moment. That's the University of South Australia and the University of Adelaide. They're both quite different institutions, but the first time sort of globally, they're merging two universities together and bringing together two learning systems, two online learning platforms, all of these different approaches to teaching. And what actually has been really quite interesting in the sort of way that they're approaching the future of education, I suppose, is the way that the online learning platforms complement the in-studio experience. So it's not just about perhaps doing a Coursera course or a LinkedIn learning course where you're passively learning information by watching videos and looking at things. It really is about how does that material online support the purpose of being in the room. It's not just this synchronous learning, it's asynchronous learning. How do those all sit together and come in a combination? I think that is something that I think probably hasn't more globally been a big focus in terms of how we could do that better so that students are getting just the right amount online that also supports just the right amount in the classroom. So that, I think that's a really big focus for the future. Which has been quite exciting to be a part of and sort of see, a process for that, perhaps in the way that the universities are responding to these pressures, things being a little bit more flexible for students so that they can work, and organise themselves around that rather than just pure online learning. Because as you know, for physical disciplines and design disciplines, it's not, you want to have some of those in-person experiences. I think the question is just which ones are the most important now to have in the classroom and get feedback from someone, or, how do we split our time, I guess, as educators as well, because that's also becoming, how much time do you have to teach, which is, how much time do you have to give feedback? And I think even post-COVID, we learned a lot teaching online and how exhausting that can be, giving lots and lots of online feedback versus where could you maybe have pockets of it and then pockets in the classroom, peer-to-peer feedback, all sorts of different things. I think there's just so many strategies available now. And I think, universities really, all sorts of learning environments really, I think, can start to build that combination, Yeah.
Well, we can give more feedback if we can simplify the feedback loops to how things used to be. It's like, if you have written feedback, it takes 10 times more time than giving an oral feedback. And the students, I remember, when I was at Kingston, Brian Love used to give me feedback and I would frantically start writing things down. And it was my responsibility.
Yeah. Yep.
Whereas where we give
Absolutely.
this written feedback, it takes 10 times, so we could be actually giving a lot more feedback.
Absolutely. It's
But we're
actually
stuck
something
somewhere writing it.
Yeah, that's something that we actually implement in our studios, which involves a lot of team teaching. But students do what we call a consultation record, which is that they actually have to write a summary of what we've spoken about together as almost a social contract, I guess, between the educator and the student as to like what have we actually discussed, so that we're both holding each other accountable.
I think we have to have less of this infantilization, issue. There's more responsibility. And that could work a lot. But what else would you propose?
It has worked.
Absolutely. But
in terms of other ideas, I'm just going to start brainstorming all sorts of different ideas.
What else would you propose that we could do?
I actually also think, obviously real world projects are always important, and as much as you can, trying to expose students to real world clients that can offer that ability, doing an actual job and actually having a conversation, and so that it's not always this idea of the lecturer or the tutor or the studio educator being the person telling them the feedback. The more that you can, broaden out that feedback, which we've also done with a number, especially in our sort of third year studios and that sort of thing, that's always really important. And I think that's something that especially here at my institution, that is quite a strong thing. There's lots of different relationships with bodies in Adelaide itself. So different organisations and other sort of external clients that link in with an industry focus. And, as much industry talks as you can get, and so that there is a real variety. I mean, these are not new things. These are not new ideas. These are things that design education has been doing for quite some time. But one of the things that I was going to suggest, though, is that I've listened to a couple of the other speakers often almost, really miss the notion of material practice as a way of talking through things. And one of the things that I'm quite passionate about, as you probably can see behind me, is the notion of students creating their own collections and the diarising their own experiences, so that they're actually broadening out what they're drawing information from. It's autoethnography. It's the idea of being out in the world and utilising your own experience within your practice, right? So we try and encourage students to make sure that they're drawing ideas from as much of their life as possible. Not just Pinterest, not just going straight to Pinterest and the Pinterest problem where, all ideas come from Google. It's kind of like, if I'm really looking at the world through a design collector's lens, how can I pick up all of these tiny little tidbits that I can merge together into an idea and then have something that is really, conceptually strong and powerful, perhaps, in the way that they communicate. And not just for visual disciplines, like this goes for all sorts of things where you get an idea. So I think that's another thing. Again, it's not a new idea. I just think that somewhere along the line, the digitization of everything and our sort of, the idea that we're constantly, a cyborg connected into these things is sort of disrupting the way that we have an embodied experience. And we actually look at the world and we're looking around ourselves and we make that a part of, we incorporate that into our design practice. And I think, beginning that from, early levels all the way through, it's not a new idea. It's just something that I really think is something to come back to in strengthening things, I guess, especially with AI and the disruption that's causing, the disembodied, sort of nature of it.
Absolutely. So where do you see this going in the future? What challenges do you think that we could be facing?
Well, I guess the ultimate challenge at the moment is for young designers, academics, design teachers are all going through this process at the moment of reevaluating practice and thinking about learning and teaching. And I think that's what's quite interesting. It's sort of scary sometimes and also a little bit exciting in the sense that there are lots of things that we could we can integrate from AI. And I know that there's a lot of people that are quite resistant to that because of the authenticity of practice and ethics and where is all of this stuff coming from. But I think there are lots of things about it that can help create efficiencies, and especially, there's lots of areas or issues around sustainability and how much power it's taking to generate all these things, and also the democratization of design. As you probably know, Canva, which is obviously a global product, design educators kind of think all sorts of different things about it, but it came out of Melbourne in Australia and has helped and assisted to democratize the use of at least visual design and lots of visual practices globally. And it's always really interesting to talk to students about the fact that it was developed here. And also recently, Procreate, another Australian company, which has also taken the world by storm, has staunchly gone against AI in terms of that conversation. But I think there's just so much talk about AI at the moment that seems to be the thing that's disrupting everything for us. Like the way that we teach is changing amongst underneath our feet. I'm not quite sure, and I'm trying to engage with AI in order to understand that process. And I think at this stage for design educators, you actually do have to get your hands dirty in AI a little bit just to understand what's not good, just as much as what is good, I suppose. And I think that is the big thing facing students. But, the idea of careers and futures has always been a problem for designers, and it's always an individual experience, as well.
There's a huge plagiarism issue, just like for using AI for writing, also AI for images. There's a huge plagiarism issue. So, and that hasn't been resolved, and it doesn't look like it's being resolved.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I don't have any answers either for that. And I know there's lots of different approaches that different countries are trying to take in terms of the copyright issue and, how that's being used. I mean, I was just thinking about this today. I've been using a platform called Krea.ai, which is actually more like an interface that uses lots of different AI models. So underneath it, it's using, diffusion models and adversarial network models and then transform models. It uses all of them as a part of it, and you can actually sort of select what you're using. But I was just talking with a colleague about this. It's so difficult to work out where any of the data sets are that they're drawing from at all. All of these just recently, Jessica Walsh, the designer, has just come out with a paid promotion with Adobe about some Firefly, which is quite interesting in terms of, quite a well-known sort of pedestal designer who's often been in the conversation of design education is sort of coming out endorsing the use of AI. And I wonder whether that is because it's drawing from licensed stock imagery,
It's not,
and
it's not just licensed stock imagery.
Yeah,
it's also people who are using Adobe CC. They came out. It's like, we own your work. It's like so that's why people are leaving Adobe in droves.
Yep, I've just opened the can of worms, Lefteris. This is the can of worms subject, that's for sure, for design education. But nonetheless, it's a real issue facing not only the industry but the way we teach. It's a really big disruptor, I think, for and I'm sure many of the people on your podcast have been talking about it or trying to grab their heads around it.
Well, thank God there are alternatives right now that are very viable. Brilliant. So how can our viewers and listeners find you?
How can they find me?
Yes.
Online. I think in your show notes, but they can find me on LinkedIn and all over the place. I've got a website and a university profile, and I'm very happy for people to reach out and talk to me about design education. I think it's an exciting time and, kind of scary, and there's just so much shifting, I suppose.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what advice would you like to leave us with? What advice? Stay positive, Lefteris. I think we've all got to stay positive about the future. Absolutely. And I think it's quite easy at the moment to feel the negativity globally, I suppose, about all sorts of things. But I think,
lots of professional networks in design nationally here are all stressed about the same issues as higher education or, teaching might have. So I think it is actually about, individualizing it and bring it back to being positive about what you can do in design. And, I still try and take that attitude into the classroom, the individual that's sitting in front of me having a conversation about their work is the transformation that education can bring ultimately. And that's the relationship that you have as a design educator. So I think like being, quite positive about the future is really important now to still inspire a new generation of designers, even though there is a lot of disruption out there at the moment. So that would be my main piece of advice to leave people with.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ari, for coming, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Keep in touch with the podcast, and
Thank you.
Take care. All the best. Bye.